Hey, folks, welcome to Free Press Sports with Carlos and Shawn. Carlos, we have another esteemed guest today.
Does esteemed mean that his steam's coming out of his ears from all the stuff that's going on over at Michigan?
Well, we'll talk to Michael Cohen about all this stuff that's going on over there. Are you suggesting that that something's not quite right in Michael Cohen?
Is anything ever quite right at Schembechler Hall? Is there ever not drama? I mean, it's like the days of our lives with James Harbaugh.
Well,
which is great for business, but it wears out the beat writers.
Yeah, we had a Reiner Saban, our colleague, all of our colleagues had a story today about, whether Jim Harbaugh acted appropriately enough when he was asked about the booing when Cade McNamara played Saturday night against Hawaii, late Saturday night, unfortunately for Michael. Maybe even Sunday morning, right, Michael?
Sunday morning.
Yeah,
I got to bed about 4:45 Sunday morning.
Oh no!
Oh yeah! Oh my goodness!
But you had a nice, relaxing Sunday off, right? Nothing else. You were just
No, I definitely did not have to write 3 stories on Sunday.
Just 2. Okay, yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, yeah. So let's get to some Michigan football with Michael Cohen, and then a little bit later you can tell us what's going on with the Lions and how optimistic you are and why that's so, and who's hijacked your soul.
The soul. Are we gonna rebrand this the soul of Carlos? Is it?
We can. By the way, when there's a pause, you can usually tell with the inflection of speech that then you go.
No, I never know when you're going to stop talking, Shawn. It's quite a lot, so I have to make sure. You know what? I've listened to the Soul of Detroit, and you guys talk over each other so much. You've gotten better at it, but I never know. Like, okay, who's talking? Are you going to let ML talk? Is he going to let you talk? Is Feller? So I'm trying to like give you your space, Shawn.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. Well, how about we give Michael Cohen some space? The great Michael Cohen, who covers Michigan Wolverines for us, obviously. Michael, welcome in. Thanks for joining us. And what's going on over in Wolverine land? You pick.
Well, it seems that J.J. McCarthy has won the quarterback competition with Cade McNamara, the way he played in a brief appearance in week 1 and then a larger appearance in the first start of his career in week 2, pretty much sealed the deal. I mean, it was obvious to anybody watching, whether you're a coach or not, that, he was just a level above what Cade McNamara could offer at the beginning of this season. And so JJ is going to be the guy starting against Connecticut in a few days here later this week. And, barring injury, I would be surprised if he gives up that starting role for the remainder of the season.
What do you think, Carlos, of that, by the way, since you're such a quarterback guru?
Yeah, that's it was my question with the whole Cade and the McNamara McCarthy showdown and everything, and it was just if you look at the level of play right in those 2 games, I mean, there was no question. You wrote about it, Shawn. It was undeniable what McCarthy brought in his first start, and I think he's mentioned that it was. It was different. It was, or you mentioned it can be freeing, right? To know that you have the job, to know that you don't have the pressure of, am I going to get subbed out, whatever it might be, having that preparation time, going in with a different attitude, right? The question is just how much of this was, mind games that mess with McNamara, because even as much as Harbaugh might have said, this is not a demotion, it's a promotion for JJ and all that, that's got to mess with a guy, right? Like, he feels like he earned that position last year and he's the team captain and all this. And you could just sense it from the way he was after that first game against Colorado State. He felt he got something stolen from him. And I think the more you think about this, if you put any quarterback in that position, right? They had a good season last year, and they come in and the coach says, you know what, though, the backup had a pretty good training camp, pretty good fall camp. We're going to see the first couple of games. It's going to be an open competition. Even elite athletes can be mentally as fragile as the rest of us. Sometimes you change that construct for them. You change their confidence sometimes. And maybe that's Cade, he played so poorly in that game against Hawaii. I mean, to me, it was kind of shocking. I don't know about you guys. What do you think? Was it surprise? I mean, if you just knew nothing about anything and you turned on that game, you think, oh, this is some 4th string kid that they're just giving a shot to. That interception was one of the worst probably I've ever seen from him and maybe in, elite college level play against a bad team. I don't know. Did it seem that this was, a different kind of Cade McNamara that we've seen before, someone who's been altered in some way?
Yeah, I think, I don't know, the quote that kind of just keeps coming back in my head is that every time when we would ask Harbaugh about McNamara last year during their winning streak and when, he would make a big play or something late in the game, he would always say, McNamara doesn't flinch. My guys don't flinch. When the pressure's on, he's not going to flinch. And it's hard to say that McNamara did anything but flinch in this latest situation. Now, people may agree or disagree on whether or not he was put in a situation that was fair, but I'm just saying when he got his chances on the field in the first 2 weeks, he definitely flinched. Now, a couple of times he was let down by the offensive line. I think that's important to note. I mean, the sack that he took against Hawaii was, a joke by right guard Zach Sinter, just completely matadored and allowed a guy to come right through. And when he got leveled in week 1, it was Trente Jones, the right tackle, who got beat really badly by the edge rusher. So it's not like every single one of his snaps was a clean pocket or anything like that. I mean, I think the announcement by Harbaugh on the podcast that on the eve or a few days before the start of the regular season that basically said, this is what I'm going to do with week 1 with Cade and week 2 with JJ. I got the sense that when that announcement was made public and then privately it had been announced to the team a day or so before, I don't think Cade had any idea that was coming. And when we talked to him a few days later, he basically kind of said, yeah, I thought I had won the job. I thought I had the best camp of my career, et cetera, et cetera. So I think he had basically, conditioned himself to think, I'm in this spot. This is going to be mine. Let's go. I'm playing great football and let's roll into the season. And so something just doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because if he really was playing his best football, but then Jim Harbaugh says, the other day that JJ separated 2.5 weeks ago, which would have been the last week of training camp, the first week of the regular season, and then the couple of days since then. Something about the timeline isn't making a lot of sense, or some set of eyes was not seeing things the way that everybody else was. Because if JJ was playing the way he played against Hawaii for the last 2.5 weeks, there's no way Cade matched that on a practice field, because it was just stuff that Cade can't do. Like, he can't make some of those throws. It's just not within him. So what was Cade doing the last 2 weeks to think that he had the job secure? I just don't, something is weird. I don't know. There's some element or timeline that is not being accurately portrayed. And I just don't know what that is.
And I just, can I say one thing? Just, I'm curious about that. It's a really good point that Michael makes is, I mean, it really sounds like, McNamara was like blindsided by this whole thing, right? It was not he didn't talk to them privately about it, which is probably the way it should have been handled. If you're going to do this, bring both those guys in, tell them, hey guys, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to talk about it on the podcast tonight, but just so you know, even then it still would have stalled.
Well, they did do that.
Okay.
Yeah. But I think it was like, it happened so close to the start of week 1 that I don't think Cade was expecting it.
Okay. All right. So it was really close. All right.
Yeah. So just to be clear, Carlos, and for the listeners, allow me, if this is okay, Michael, I think what you're saying is that the quarterbacks were told by Harbaugh. It's just that it was so close to the season. The podcast is kind of neither here nor there. It may not have been fun to hear that publicly, but he already knew that privately because he'd been told. It's just it was so close to the start of the camp. The bigger issue in his own mind, and this is the theory that I would offer up. I think it's just my perspective. I think in Cade's own mind, he did think he was playing probably the best ball. Maybe he just felt more comfortable coming off of last year. The success, felt more confident. Maybe he looked a little bit sharper in practice than he did a year ago. But again, there's a cap to that, right? There's a ceiling to that. But he can't see that cap because it's hard to see that no matter what we're doing for any of us and ourselves. So he's in that spot. Meanwhile, McCarthy's doing what Harbaugh said he was doing the last week of camp, week and a half of camp, whatever. And to your point, Michael, it's just he's doing stuff that McNamara can't do. And sometimes it's hard to see that. It's like we experience that, just for our listeners, we experience that. Y'all probably doing whatever you're doing out there, but we do that in our own business. How many times, Michael or Carlos, have you been in competition with somebody, or you wanted a job, a certain kind of beat, whatever, a writing position, and you look at the competition around and you look at your own stuff and you're like, well, I'm just as good or I'm better. And maybe we're not in that, right? It's hard for us to judge. So I really think that's probably all this was in some level is more McNamara and his not wanting to maybe acknowledge what McCarthy was doing, at the same time feeling as good as he's ever felt. I'm curious what y'all think of that.
Yeah, I mean, I've wanted the Shawn Windsor job for a long time and then still have not gotten it. So call me Cade McNamara if you want, I guess. But no, you know what? We have to remember this, right? These are young men. These are, how old is Cade? 21, 22? I mean, this is the first time in their lives that they're dealing with this kind of thing, this kind of professional adversity. And you put a guy who took your team to the college, football playoffs, and they won the Big Ten title and they beat Ohio, all this stuff. And it's like, oh, you're not going to be the starter next year. You've lost your job. That's just kind of crazy. It's hard to understand. And I think Harbaugh wants it both ways, right? He wants, as you keep saying, two great quarterbacks, sure. Who doesn't want two of everything? I want two Ferraris. I want two wives. I want two houses. Sure, two is always better than one. But the reality is there's sometimes, that's not a tenable situation. And you're going to encounter some problems doing that. It's just not I'll get to this question a little bit, but I mean, it's not a situation that's going to continue. It can exist for a little bit, one season probably, and then things have to change.
Well, history shows us that, right? And I'm curious what you think of this, Michael. Curious what you think of this, Michael. I would argue that if, let's just say, for argument's sake, that Michigan had a senior quarterback last year, they had a great year, whatever, and McNamara was kind of the backup to him, and McCarthy comes in as a freshman last year, and they're the same age as they are right now. And McNamara had showed, good stuff in practice, but they just had this other quarterback. And so coming into camp this year, it's McCarthy and McNamara, and they both had the camps they had. And McNamara's thinking, oh, this is the best I've ever felt on a football field. And McCarthy's showing what he's showing. There's no way to me that they do this. Harbaugh names McCarthy out of the gate. I think that he did that in deference to what McNamara did a year ago. But if you take that out and you're just judging what happened in August and now in the first two games, not even the first, just August, then I think it's an easier decision for him. I'm curious what you think of that as a coach yourself too.
I don't know. The idea that he did it out of deference to McNamara, I think that sounds really good. And I get it from like a moral standpoint, but I think the more logical thing is he wanted to do what was best for Michigan football. And the best thing for Michigan football was to keep two quarterbacks on his roster that he thinks can win games in case one of them gets hurt. So by letting this competition continue or letting Cade think that the job is his or whatever, whether he intended to or not, that gives Cade no reason to enter the transfer portal until it comes to a point where entering the transfer portal doesn't allow him to play right away anymore because the deadline passes. And, I know you guys both know the great columnist at Yahoo Sports, Dan Wetzel. He was talking about this a while ago on his podcast, and he referred to what Harbaugh did as portal guarding. And I thought that was a pretty clever term, essentially saying that what Jim did was arrange the quarterback competition in a way that guarded against one or both of the players going into the portal because they were unhappy with the way the arrangement was shaking out. And I tend to think that would be more of what happened, just because whenever you talk to Harbaugh, all he says over and over again is every move that I make, everything that we do is in order to find what's best for Michigan football, what's best for the team, what's best for the program, what's best for the, season, et cetera, et cetera. And having Cade and or JJ leave over the summer is not what's best for Michigan football. So I think it was an open competition. I think maybe he gave Cade the benefit of the doubt by letting him start in week one. Maybe Cade took slightly too much liberty by thinking that, getting voted captain meant that he was the starter and all that stuff. I'm not saying it's Cade's fault, but there is a fraction of the pie, I think, that, Cade would like to have back if he could do it again with some of the things that he said in public. But I don't know. I just kind of think coaches are going to, and look, let me preface this by saying whether it was Jim Harbaugh or Nick Saban or Mel Tucker or whoever, I would be saying the exact same thing. This isn't a specific criticism of Harbaugh. I just think the coach at Michigan did what was best for Michigan the way the coach at any school would do what's best for his school. And so I would be just as critical, whoever the individual was. I just think it could have been handled in a way that gave McNamara some options if he wanted those options. And instead, it was not handled that way.
Well, I agree with you that he was doing what he thought was best, but I don't mean that he was trying to protect McNamara. I think it has to do also with the locker room. I mean, the fact that he was voted captain says a lot, right? You risk if you just automatically hand the job to a guy who had surgery, missed spring ball, comes in, is a little bit rusty the first couple of weeks, which by all accounts he was, and that's what you're going to do when this other quarterback is beloved. Then you're putting other things at risk there, right?
Yeah, I mean
that's what I think about protecting the team. I agree with you about the portal, but I think it's even bigger than that. I think it's because it sends a message to everybody else, and if he's always preaching meritocracy, and based on what McNamara did, and McCarthy being hurt, not having the chance. I mean, you'd probably agree if McCarthy's in spring ball and healthy from the start, maybe it's not a competition that way either.
Yeah, I think the other thing to remember is that there's two groups of people that coaches are trying to appease. One of them is the group that's in the locker room, and the other one is the group they're trying to get into their locker room.
That's right.
And so all of the freshmen that are on campus now, based on the story that our colleague Reiner Saban wrote last year, they were pitched on the fact that this was going to be JJ's offense, that they were going to sling the ball all over the field, that he was going to be the guy, that it was going to turn over to him. And so, maybe the coaches, when they said those things, were speaking more generally in that, Cade, they just assumed that JJ would succeed Cade at some point. But, there's also the idea that if this is what you're telling recruits and then those recruits get on campus and it's not exactly what they were pitched, do they just jump in the transfer portal right away? So I think coaches have these commitments on both ends of the spectrum now. Keep the guys in their program happy, but also make sure that the things that they said to get the new guys in don't contradict, don't clash with each other.
Okay, Michael, let's take a quick break and we'll be right back with more Free Press Sports with Carlos and Shawn.
My name is Kerry Jr. II. I'm a podcast producer and reporter with the Detroit Free Press, and now the host of Freep's new weekly podcast, On the Line. Our job is to understand the issues and the people that the issues affect in our state and region and tell the news. I want Detroiters, I want Michiganders, I want Metro Detroiters to hear themselves and maybe get a sense of peace in this podcast. Maybe not in the topics we're covering, but in the sense that we're the Detroit Free Press. And you can come here to know what's happening and trust that we're going to tell the truth, give you the facts, and do it authentically. We're going to give you the voices that are in those areas, whether it be in Owasso, or it be in Petoskey, or whether it be in Birmingham, Warren, Grosse Pointe, Southwest Detroit. We're going to give you what it sounds like to be there. So every Friday in your feed, wherever you get your podcast, when you press play, we want this podcast to sound like home. We want it to sound like Michigan. We want it to sound like Detroit. I think that's all I got. So let the journey begin.
Welcome back to Free Press Sports with Carlos and Shawn. Michael just made a really good point about the idea of college coaches at the football and basketball too, but at the highest levels having to continually recruit, not just high school kids, but recruit the players in your own locker room, and how you're trying to, I don't want to say appease, because it makes it, we don't want to assume there's always tension everywhere, but there often is. And I'm curious what you think of that, Carlos.
Yeah, I mean, you have to appreciate the juggling act they have, right? I mean, it's a game of chess. They got to, keep the team together, keep them motivated, not disenfranchise any group of players, so my question, leading to this is asking Michael, is there any way that Cade McNamara does not transfer after this season?
I mean, technically, yeah. If he decided he wanted to go pro, he wouldn't have to transfer. He could go try and cut his teeth as a backup or a practice squad guy or whatever, because he's good enough to where he would get an invite to training camp from somebody. And who knows? I mean, he could even be a 7th round draft pick or something like that, a late draft pick. But if I was Cade, and I'm not, and I don't necessarily have a ton of knowledge in terms of his thought process on this, but I would think that he would be reasonably attractive in the transfer portal to that second tier level of team. And by that, I mean, not Alabama, not Georgia, not places like that. But, most teams in the Big Ten, I think, would at least take a sniff around and see what he was interested in. Certainly maybe schools in the ACC. I know he's from Reno, so maybe some Pac-12 schools outside of USC and Oregon would probably be interested in him. So I think he would have options, and I think he could probably find a situation where he would be more or less guaranteed to be the starter. I kind of think that would be attractive to him just because he is such a competitor. He's smart enough to know that he's not Peyton Manning in terms of what his NFL future is probably going to look like. So with NIL and everything else, he can still find a way to make a decent amount of money and be the man, so to speak, at another program. We talked about this, I think, the last time you guys had me on, but he has 2 more years of eligibility after this. So theoretically, on paper, he could overlap with the entirety of JJ McCarthy's career. And this goes to that point that you made, Carlos, about the situation is tenable, and we say that in quotes, for a short amount of time, but it's not tenable over the long run. So something has to change. And if you ask me right now, is Cade on the Michigan roster next season? I would say no. But does he play somewhere else, or does he decide, I've already got my degree. He's working on a master's degree right now. He might even finish that by May, depending on the length of the program. He may just say, look, I won a Big Ten title. I got to the college football playoff. I have 2 degrees. Let me go try and latch on with some team's 53-man roster as a backup or something like that. So I think that question's harder to answer, but the one of whether he'll be here or not, it just doesn't really make a lot of sense to me for him to come back.
Well, and this is just more commonplace. Carlos and I watched the quarterback. I don't know if you did, Michael, in person at Ford Field on Sunday, who lost his job in Alabama after getting to the college football playoff, right? Jalen Hurts, and got pulled in the title game. And then where'd he go? Oklahoma, I think. So, it's just kind of how it is. And what's interesting is that Hurts right now looks like the better quarterback. I don't know how that'll play out in the long run over Tua. But in any case, there was probably no great way to handle any of this. And I think unless you don't have a soul or a heart, you have some empathy for Cade McNamara and for other players who find themselves in these positions after doing everything they've been asked, and they're good at what they do, sometimes really good. And somebody comes along who's just a little bit better. And that's a tough thing in life, but it is part of life. And to your point, Michael, it's always going to be about what's best for the program, because there are people that have a lot at stake that are trying to make sure that what's best for the program is going to lead to wins. Having said all that, Michael, what about the ceiling now of this offense, of this team, with JJ McCarthy running things, and how can it be maybe different from a year ago?
Yeah, it's really exciting, I think, for fans, because JJ can just do stuff that Cade can't. And I know that sounds really, generic, but what I mean is, he can make the throw from one boundary to the other. He can scramble outside the pocket and Brett Favre his way to a completion after he's rolled out and bought 3 or 4 or 5 seconds or whatever the case may be. But most importantly, I think he has the deep ball range and accuracy to make better use of some of the speed that Michigan does have on this defense, because Cornelius Johnson is probably a 4.45 to 4.5 guy, so that's good speed. Roman Wilson is down in the low 4.3s, if you believe the coaching staff. That's about as good as it gets at the college level. They've got some younger freshmen who are burners as well. So I think look, in week 1 when McNamara started, he did not throw a pass that traveled more than 20 yards downfield. And JJ had 3 or 4 completions that went longer than 20 yards downfield, let alone, balls that were just thrown that far and then might have gotten, tipped or fell incomplete or whatever. So I just think the ceiling is so much different. And one area that I think it could be especially different is in the red zone. Shawn, you and I talked about this a lot in press boxes last year, especially the first half of the season, where McNamara was great at moving the ball between the 20s, and then the offense would just kind of crumble in the red zone. Now, it wasn't always his fault. Sometimes receivers weren't getting open. We saw for the first half of the year, offensive coordinator Josh Gaddis basically refused to design anything for the tight ends in the red zone. And then the tight ends became a focal point in the red zone in the second half of the year. So there were all different factors there. But McCarthy's ability to run, his ability to extend plays, all the different things that you kind of see, on Sundays with some of these best quarterbacks, your Aaron Rodgers, your Patrick Mahomes, these guys that can just make stuff happen. I'm not saying McCarthy's on that level. I'm saying his playing style is closer to that than it would be of a statuesque Tom Brady style, where you're staying in the pocket, and if the pocket collapses, well, that's all there is to it. So what is the ceiling? I mean, I think either he or Cade could probably have won just about every game on the schedule. And I know based on the first couple games, maybe that sounds silly based on, what Cade did, but I still think he could have won most of the games on the schedule. JJ can too. I just think JJ probably gives him a better chance against Ohio State. And if they do reach the college football playoff again, I think he gives them a better chance against whatever caliber of opponent they're going to face there, because he can put up points in bunches 7 at a time instead of Cade, who puts up points in bunches but mixes in some threes with those 7s. And that makes it hard to keep up with schools that can score 40 or 50 a game.
I want to get back to just one thing before, we move on, because, we can't talk enough about the quarterback situation, probably for Shawn's liking, at least. You brought up the Dan Wetzel portal guarding idea, and I just wonder, and obviously, when time passes, I don't know if people will remember exactly what happened this year and how it transpired. Or, kids are different when they come in, right? Everybody thinks it's, the world has just been invented when they arrive, but can that work a second time? Can he portal guard this time? And then Jaden Davis comes in a couple of years, whatever it is, and there's another maybe kind of similar situation or whatever. I mean, will people not sniff it out of, oh, you're doing the same thing? Like, nobody, you got to name me the starter. I'm not the starter by the start of spring ball or during spring ball or whatever, whenever the deadline is. What is it, July or whatever, then I'm out of here. Or do kids really have enough belief in themselves to always think they're going to win the job because they're just better?
Well, I think that, and I also think every school in the country is doing this. It's not unique to Michigan. So if they're being pursued by Michigan and Ohio State and Alabama and whoever, Nick Saban and Ryan Day are doing the same portal guarding stuff. Look, Ryan Day said he needed $13 million or whatever it was to keep his roster together. So, that's essentially portal guarding. Pay me so I can pay the players, and then they won't go into the portal. So I think it's just kind of like the new wave, and maybe there will be guys who will specifically seek out situations where there's basically no threat to them to start day one, quarterbacks I'm talking about, or skill position players for the most part. But in terms of Jaden Davis, he's a junior right now, so he's got this year and next year. That would be McCarthy's senior year that he would be coming in as a true freshman. Who knows if JJ explodes this year and next year, he could go to the NFL by then after his junior season, which is what a lot of people thought when he got on campus, that he would be a 3 and done type of a guy. I don't know. It's hard. Part of me says like this isn't that big of a, the transfer portal is a huge thing. Don't get me wrong, but recruiting talent every single year is not a new concept. And if you happen to recruit over the guys that you have just because you got better players one year than the year before, like I don't think that's necessarily a new concept. Shawn, last year with basketball, we saw Brandon Johns, who had done a lot for this team the year prior, basically get forced out of the lineup within a month for Moussa Diabate, simply because Juwan Howard had recruited over the talent level that Brandon Johns had and brought in somebody better. And nobody really cried or whined for Brandon Johns because they saw how much better Moussa was. And I wonder if over the next few weeks, if McCarthy just completely lights it up, if all of a sudden, the idea that Jim did something wrong or left McNamara aggrieved kind of fades away because they see, maybe he could have handled it slightly better or differently, but holy cow, this kid is just electric. So it's really interesting. It's hard. And I think, the bottom line is it goes back to this idea that in the transfer portal era, everybody's kind of learning on the fly. Same with the NIL stuff. How much do you have to promise? What do you have to promise? How strong do those promises have to be? If you break those promises, what's the next group going to think about you as a coaching staff? And it's all this weird gray area that everyone's figuring out on the fly. So it's just murky, but I think that's the time we live in now.
That's and that's really the only difference, Michael. Those are all good points, is the ability to leave, because you used to come no matter how good you were. You had to wait your turn, and there wasn't much you could do about it, right? And if you did, you were going to have to give up a year of eligibility to do it, and you don't have to do that anymore. Justin Fields couldn't beat out Jake Fromm, right, at Georgia. He goes to Ohio State. Joe Burrow's at Ohio State. He can't get past Justin Fields. He goes to LSU. This stuff is, it's maybe new to Ann Arbor right now, but it's not new to college football. It's been going on for a few years. I don't think In fact, I think the opposite of what you say. If McCarthy just goes nuts this next month, 6 weeks, 2 months, whatever, people are going to wonder and look back and say, what were you looking at, Harbaugh, back in the summer? And I also think what makes this a little bit unique is getting back to the fact that McCarthy missed spring ball. And so it just wasn't as clean. And so it was kind of a unique situation that way because of the injury. And speaking of Johns, that's a good point. But I would argue with McNamara, because he was the quarterback, because Beeline had a different kind of success. Michigan hadn't tasted that kind of run in a generation. And McNamara wasn't the best player on that team by any means, but he was sort of the face of it in a way, right? The sentimental face of it. And so there's a connection there. But at the same time, you've seen in social media how quickly folks are reacting. They didn't like the way he responded after Colorado State. And then some of them were booing him, which I think was going way too far the other day against Hawaii. But, I think for the most part, fans understand how messy this can be. Having said all that, though, do you think, because getting back to your point about watching what McCarthy can do over McNamara, you and I were watching the game in person at Georgia, and I remember McCarthy comes in and immediately makes a couple plays where he gets outside, and people are dismissing it, saying, well, that's not against their starters. Well, you know what? Those starters are right now starting for the number one team in the country, and those are all NFL guys. So I don't know what you make of that, Michael, but there was a clear difference the minute McCarthy got in the game against Georgia.
Yeah, I mean, it just comes down to the fact that he can just do things that Cade can't. He can gobble up yards faster, he can run, he can move, all those different types of things. So I think it's if McNamara has a high floor, then McCarthy just has a higher ceiling. And I think that's kind of what it comes down to. Carlos, I had a question for you, though. I think even if this remains icky with Cade and JJ, and Cade is grumpy or whatever, or even if it gets worse and Cade, just after the season storms off in a tirade, whatever. Do you agree with me that 10, 15, 20 years from now, people will still look at him pretty fondly for what he did, and that no matter how messy this eventual divorce, if in fact there is an eventual divorce, no matter how messy it is, that over time people will be appreciative of what he did, even if McCarthy goes on to be whatever McCarthy's going to be?
Yes, unless he goes to the Big Ten East program and comes down and stuffs it down their throat, right? And
that's a good point.
It all depends on how he handles his the future, right? If he goes to a different team and whatever, if he doesn't talk poorly of Michigan, if he goes to go play for whatever it might be, right? Some other second tier kind of program, whatever, and he doesn't besmirch the good name of Michigan, I think so. Because once you're a Michigan man, you're a Michigan man, right? If you just say the right things and all that, you'll be good, I think. What do you think, Shawn? Is his legacy secured if he doesn't talk smack?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I guess he would have to talk a lot of smack. Just the way people responded to the few yahoos who booed, right? I mean, there's a lot of love for him. It's the difference between, like, Joe Burrow. I don't know that he's got any kind of connection with Ohio State because he didn't do anything there. He didn't get the chance to do anything there. Whereas Hurts in Alabama is beloved, right? And they just, Matuitis came in and it was spectacular. And you're thinking about the potential. So to me, that's the difference. I think he's fine. That was the snowflake game, right? Beating the Buckeyes. I know Hutchinson's kind of the iconic figure out of all that, but McNamara is part of that too, in a really, really fundamentally emotional way. And sports are about, especially fandom, it's about emotion. And there's a connection there, especially with the university. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I also think too that McNamara is smart enough to know that McCarthy's playing style doesn't necessarily lend itself to 100% health over the course of
Exactly. I wrote that. Exactly.
McCarthy's a guy who, he was open about it the other night when we talked to him. He said, I love contact. I grew up a hockey player. I like getting hit in games. I like fighting for extra yards, but I'm having to learn that when I do that, it's just me being selfish and it's not necessarily for the best interest of the team. So I'm trying to have to learn when I slide, when I go out of bounds, all that stuff, because it's really self-serving if I'm just trying to fight for extra yards, but then I get hurt. So, I think there's a chance that we see McNamara again at some point this year if JJ McCarthy gets nicked up. I also still have some mild concerns about that shoulder injury. He admitted that it was a labrum problem and that he was at one point very close to having surgery on it. and they decided not to. And so if it was at a point where surgery was at least entertained, even if it was ultimately decided against, that tells me that, it was a pretty significant injury. And so who knows how that's going to respond by November when he's thrown all kinds of passes and taken some hits and this, that, and the other. Maybe it's nothing, and maybe I'm just bringing this up and it proves to be irrelevant. But, labrums and throwing shoulders are a big deal. And so that was when he admitted that it was a labrum issue, that kind of was like, whoa, okay, store this away just in case it's a potential red flag.
And,
well,
I mean,
go ahead, Carl. Sorry.
Could we see Cade in the maybe early third quarter when they're up 48-0 on UConn?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's a given,
I don't know. I don't understand why Harbaugh just doesn't, hey, JJ, you won the job, but Cade's going to play against UConn. Just rest that shoulder up a little, buddy.
And that's not going to be fun, by the way. If we could just say this, just the last thing on Cade, that's not going to be fun. It's just not. All of a sudden, he's coming in during the blowouts, right? Like
it's going to be awkward. It's going to be, to use a really great word, icky.
Yeah, but not necessarily for other people. I mean, there'll be some empathy for him, but it's mostly going to be within Cade. That's just going to be really tough for him. At least last year, McCarthy came in, and it was part of the game plan, right? So yeah. McNamara now is going to come in if the game's out of hand. So I guess that's loosely a game plan, but it's not anywhere near the same strategy.
Yeah, well, so I was on the radio earlier this week, and somebody asked me the question of, is there any way that Cade would come in small doses the way that JJ did last year? And the way I was kind of thinking about it in my head is JJ came in for certain situations because he can do things that Cade can't do in terms of mobility, in terms of arm strength, in terms of whatever. But I was struggling to come up with a skill that Cade has that would warrant putting him in the game in small situations that JJ doesn't have. The only one I kept coming back to was experience, which is certainly valuable. But I just don't know if it's valuable enough to where you're going to want to take JJ off the field in a key third down just because Cade's been in key third downs before. He doesn't have the arm strength. He doesn't have the speed. He doesn't have the mobility. So I think it would be JJ start to finish in close games. I don't really see a need to use Cade, which again, like you said, Shawn, it's not going to be fun. It's going to suck for him.
It really is. And I think he's a type of player and personality, human being. How about that? Who is not going to try to drag everybody down with him, whatever he's roiling inside with. And we've all been there to some degree or the other. I don't think he's going to, right. Not only that, it's not going to be good if he wants to transfer, because those coaches are going to make, they're going to make calls and they talk and they're like, yeah, the way he handled this. You remember how Saban talked about, I hate to keep coming back to Hurts, but I remember how Saban talked about how Hurts handled that and how hard that was and how difficult a situation that was to navigate and the way he did it. And, obviously he was super talented and he's more talented than McNamara, but I got to believe that that makes a difference. Real quickly, I could see a scenario. Let's just say they're at Iowa. And Iowa's not that good, but I don't know. They're not been scoring. He's a little bit off target. He's feeling the pressure. Maybe you could see to start the third quarter. All right, let's come with McNamara because we don't want to lose this game. McCarthy's feeling the pressure. I'm not saying that'll happen, but that's the only scenario I could see where they want somebody who's not going to feel the pressure in the same way.
I think that's fair. What do you think, Carlos?
Yeah, I don't think you have to worry about Iowa after they lost to Iowa State, and that's not a really big. Will Ferentz be the coach still at that point? I don't know. Yeah, maybe, possibly. But I could see. I mean, the situation I see, right, is it's really not a strategy thing. It's just, is McCarthy feeling a little banged up, and it's like, is a full Cade better than a 3/4 McCarthy in this situation, especially if the protection's breaking down, he's getting hit a little bit too much. Like, hey, take him out. And let's live to see another day. Let's see him operate. And that's another question for McNamara, right? Is how is he going to respond when he's rusty and when he doesn't get a lot of, even though he has experience, if he doesn't play much the next few games, and if he has to come in against a decent Big Ten opponent, it might be a little icky yet again. I love that word, Michael. Thank you for bringing it.
I'm looking at the schedule. They beat Maryland by 1 million last year, so he could play against Maryland. Let's just assume for argument's sake, Iowa's close. They're going to probably mash Indiana, so he could play against Indiana. Penn State and Michigan State, again, for argument's sake, let's say those are close, but they're probably going to kill Rutgers. They're probably going to kill Nebraska. They're probably going to kill Illinois. So there's like 6 games that McNamara could still play in the second half if they're lopsided. So I don't know. And again, to go back to Shawn's point, like, just because he's playing in those 6 games, I still don't think it's going to be fun for him. Like, he's going to be in there with backups and second stringers, and he's going to know it's irrelevant, and fans are going to be trickling out of the stadium. It's just, I don't know. Like, yeah, I think he's going to get enough reps to where he stays somewhat sharp, but I just think I don't know. To me, it sounds pretty miserable, but I guess I'm not him, so I don't know.
You also have to look at it a little bit of as almost like a tryout, for other teams if he is going to transfer or go to the NFL, which I'm not even going to get into that, but yeah, I mean, his next step, right? He's got to do something to show I'm still a viable quarterback. I can, even not the best situation to come into, I can be professional. I can do what I need to do.
Exactly.
In this team.
Exactly. That's the key. All right, Michael, thank you so much for giving us your time and coming in. There's a lot to talk about. Hopefully they remain relevant. I think, as you pointed out, they're probably not going to lose, well, for a while anyway. So we will love to have you back soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, fellas. I appreciate it.
All right, anytime. We will take one more quick break and be right back with more Free Press Sports with Carlos and Shawn.
Hello, I'm Phil Friend, the host and producer of Spartan Speak, a podcast collaboration between the Detroit Free Press and Lansing State Journal focusing on Michigan State sports. Each week, I'm joined by the OGs of the MSU podcasting game, Freak beat writer Chris Laurie and LSJ sports columnist Graham Couch, as we discuss and dissect the latest sports news coming out of East Lansing. Not only is Spartan Speak one of, if not the longest-running MSU sports podcasts out there, you won't find a show with 2 people as clued into the Spartans as Chris and Graham, each of whom have spent a decade-plus covering MSU and bring years of institutional knowledge and insight to the podcast. And once in a while, they'll let me throw out a take as well. Along with discussing the latest news, we'll break down the Spartans' last game on the hardwood and the gridiron. What went right? What went wrong? Jet sweep. Again? For both Mel Tucker and Tom Izzo, get you ready for the next game, make predictions, and so much more. We can also guarantee at least one reference to Kalamazoo every podcast. So if you haven't already, download, subscribe, and listen to Spartan Speak on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or on your podcast app of choice.
Welcome back to Free Press Sports with Carlos and Shawn. Carlos, I know you don't really care for college football, but you're kind of being it's being forced upon you now, isn't it? I mean, it's the story. Well, the Lions. We're about to talk about the Lions here, but it's been the biggest story, right? The quarterbacks and all that. You can't escape it. I'm sorry,
you cannot. And all the fanaticism that goes along with college football is the best thing about college football, right? And we have a lot of it here, and all the drama that comes out of Schembechler Hall, as I said earlier. It's good for business, Shawn. Really good for business.
Yeah, it certainly can be. And especially when they're winning, right? I mean, when they're losing, that's good for business for a short period of time, and then people just get,
I don't care. We've had this discussion. I don't care if you win or you lose. I'm not going to follow that. I mean, it's like, yeah, if your team wins Super Bowl after Super Bowl, championship after championship, yeah, that's fine, whatever, But look at the Dodgers. I mean, I don't think the Dodgers getting any more huge amount. The media in LA gets a ton more traffic. I mean, it's still the NFL, even though the Rams just won a Super Bowl, there's going to be a lot of like interest in Justin Herbert with the Chargers and the Rams. And
well, yeah,
the Dodgers are the best team in baseball. They've been the best team in baseball for like how many years now? It's like, yeah, winning.
I'm not saying I can't. I'm not saying I care one way or the other. What I'm saying is, readers, they're more interested with winning. They will hate read for a while, and the numbers bear this out. I mean, we can track this kind of stuff, and it shows. Even with Michigan football, right? With the Lions. How about we start with the Lions and keep this line of question going a little bit, or line of talk. The Lions, I don't remember the last time I heard that kind of noise in there. That felt that kind of electricity. It's been a bit. Yeah. I assume you would agree with that. My question to you is, how long will we feel that again this season?
It's always, I mean, it does tend to get loud in the season opener when the team is not, even last year, probably the first home game, there's always excitement, but it was start to finish. Is that going to keep going? Yeah. I mean, if they're competitive as they should be, in the next few home games, I mean, I think that would be sustained. And you're right. I mean, definitely one thing for fans, whether they read or not or whatever, going to the games. Yeah, you have to win to keep the momentum and keep fans coming and keep them energized. So I think that this is something that, I don't know if they've turned a corner yet, but that showing against Philadelphia. And I think you're going to see as the season goes on that Philadelphia is a pretty good team. So having that kind of showing, in the season opener at home is promising.
What kind of feedback did you get to your column? Because you and I wrote kind of an instant, what we call an instant column. We just made that up. It's not any long-term journalism thing, but and then you wrote, a much more thoughtful, pensive column that basically said the same thing. You just need a little bit more time to get your thoughts together, which is good. You have a lot more thoughts to sift through. You're just a bigger brain. So, and I accept that. But in any case, what do you think? I mean, do you buy? I mean, I'm curious what the response was to your column, because I did hear from some folks that are just sick of it. Even though it was fun, even though it was loud, even though it was competitive, they are sick of it. They want to be the team that has the pick six. They want to be the team that makes the stop and makes the winning field goal, as we saw a few times around the NFL Sunday, right? We saw a couple of upsets, or what we thought are upsets, what we think are upsets. They might not be upsets 2 months from now. Looking back, but what do you think? I mean, did you get some of that kind of response?
Yeah, I mean, there was the one response I remember clearly was someone on, I don't know, it was an email or something from, it was just an initial. It was A. Windsor from Ann Arbor saying that my column was much better than Shawn's for some reason. But yeah, it's, people, yeah, I mean, hey, listen, give me all the response you want on Twitter or email, text, you're not going to text me, but, people are going to be critical, right? It's, if you're negative, you're always negative. If you are putting out the nuance, you're too positive and you're just, carrying the water. And you and I were.
Did you get accused of that?
Yes, yes, I got accused of being too positive, and you're just drinking the Kool-Aid, and you're just, you're just in love with Dan Campbell and this and that, and it's like, no, like there's a lot of nuance to what happens. And that's the disappointing part is I hope that if you would read my column, if you would read your column carefully, we're the ones who we follow these players, these coaches. We're in the locker rooms, at practices. Over years, we see the difference. We see the tone, and I try to convey that as much as I can. It's not just what happened on the field; it's how these teams synthesize it. How they look at it, how they, and if you saw the way I went to the Eagles press conference with Slay and Sirianni, and and even though they were happy they got the win, you could tell there was a little bit of we escaped this thing. We just got out of this, relief. And the Eagles should not have felt relief after that game. They should have felt like, oh man, we dusted the Lions, no problem, right? We have deep playoff hope aspirations. And if you got the sense from the Lions, they felt proud of themselves for what they did, for sticking to it, to what they wanted to do, coming back, rallying, almost winning, almost having a chance to win that game, 3-point loss. They're not like they're happy that they lost, but I think they probably, in all honesty, exceeded their expectations a little bit in that game. I mean, what was your sense of that?
I saw a lot of those quotes from Philadelphia, including from Hurts, who flat out said, man, that's a good team, right? Yeah. And you never hear that from the opponents. I mean, it's not going to say anything. They're not going to rip on the Lions. They're just going to not say much, but so that was a little surprising. And so I got the same sense. I wasn't in there like you, but from the Lions part of it, they were almost a little frustrated. They felt like like that was their game, even though it may not have looked like that for a big chunk of it. But that felt a little different to me. Like, I think they actually thought that they were going to win the game going into the game.
Yeah.
And that felt weirdly different. I maybe that's delusional. But
well, Campbell said that I think the next day on Monday or something, like, we just ran out of time, which isn't really true. Like, if you need 5 quarters to win a game, you're not winning the game really. But yeah, they felt like we're surging here. They had the momentum, I don't know how many unanswered points they scored, but they had the momentum there. And you could see the Eagles were playing tighter, right? And the Lions were doing what they needed to do. And they gave themselves a chance, saying that they Goff, I think, said, we felt we could have scored 50, like, yeah, okay, whatever. There were some, it wasn't perfect.
Whatever.
There was some promise. And I think that's what you can take from this, is just that there was some promise with this team. Defensively, they have a ways to go, but offensively, they showed some things that they can build on, and against a good team. So it's a good start. That's what you could hope for with this team, is a good start. We'll see how many wins they end up with, but that's encouraging when they start saying these kind of things. 50 points and we ran out of time, and Hurts, and I think Slay said the same thing, a good team. So you can't, I don't know how you can accuse people of drinking too much Kool-Aid if you watch that same game, but they're always criticized.
I know. I'm with you. I've heard some of the same thing, but I just, I thought they showed some juice. And
don't say grit.
And no, I'm not going to say grit, but and by juice, I mean just playmaking, right? I mean, there's just a little bit more of it, and not enough to go win a Super Bowl or make a playoff run or make the playoffs, but enough to be a little bit more consistently competitive and to win more than 3 games, barring health.
Yeah,
that's what I saw. I mean, who knows, right? But maybe Philly's terrible and none of us know what we're looking at all. But it just felt a little bit different. Having said that, they need to beat Washington. I'm with. I mean, for these fans' sake, to show that it's a little bit different, to prove all this talk from the camp, what we heard in Hard Knocks, all that. They need to beat Washington. They do. They lose to Washington, and then who's next? Minnesota.
At Minnesota, yeah.
At Minnesota,
New England.
No, they're not. And New England, I know, got spanked the other day, but on Sunday. But it could get really ugly in a hurry if they don't beat Washington.
This is a game that the Commanders are not a good team. They there was a narrow win over Jacksonville in Washington. This is the kind of subpar team, and yes, the Lions are probably they're a subpar team too, but they need to be able to build on what they did that first week and another home game and beat a bad team or a very not good team like Washington. They need to beat them. They can't. This was close this week. I promise the readers there's not going to be any this was close and whatever. They've got to beat.
No,
if you're going to win 6 or 7 or whatever, or some crazy people were saying 9 games, Shawn. Some people were saying 9 games in the predictions.
Who said 8? Did Dave say? Dave Burkett say 8?
I think he changed it to 9, maybe. You went to 9 too, didn't you?
I did. I was thinking 8, but then I thought, maybe they'll get lucky and pick off one more.
Yeah. We need. Hey, Andrew.
Like yesterday, I thought maybe they, if they beat Philly, I was thinking, and they came close.
I just want to tell Andrew. I want to tell
close.
Andrew and Anjana we need some substance testing after this, after these predictions. So, but
no close. Yeah. Well, your predictions are often wrong too. The other way. That's so. How do we hold you accountable for being wrong in that way?
Nobody remembers who predicted what.
So I see. So you can bitch about other people being not held accountable for being too high, but when you're too low, which is usual.
I was too high last year. I think everybody was way too high last year. 3 wins. Who saw that?
Well, yeah, no, for sure. But I'm with you. They got to win, man. They just do. Or if I'm not saying the season's over, but if they don't beat Washington, it's going to get it could get ugly for a while.
Well, it's a bad sign, and that's the thing. The Philadelphia game shows you something about potential, but the Washington game should also show you something about potential. And I mean, hey, listen, I would expect them to win whatever you want to say handily by close to 10 points in this game, but even if it's just a close one, a 3-point win or whatever.
Just
win is a win. Just win. 1 point. I don't care. Whatever. Even if the Commanders cough it up and whatever, and it's a defensive score at the, whatever, something weird, a doink off the goalpost.
Doesn't matter.
It's a win.
Doesn't matter. Got to win.
Yeah.
That's where we're at. Yeah. They had the grace period. It was fun. It was loud.
Yep.
And now it's time to win. So,
absolutely.
All right. What's I think it's that time of the show for your favorite thing, and I'm curious what it is this week, my brother.
This is a good one, Shawn. This is my favorite thing was, as I told you last week, Tony Garcia and I, great young Free Press reporter. We were interim co-head coaches for our softball team on Belle Isle for the Free Press, because the other great Tyler Davis, assistant sports editor, had some stupid Free Press fantasy football draft that Jim Schaefer was also at, so we had to sub for him, and it was a really fun game. We won. It was only our second win of the season, so I'm now retiring with a 1.00 winning percentage as a coach. Thank you. But here's a nice thing, Shawn. Afterward, everybody was so happy. We had actually 2 get-togethers like the same week, a few days, with the softball team and some friends and former, other journalism friends and whatnot. And it was a lot of young people. And you and I are not young people anymore, Shawn. And I don't get the chance to hang out with people who are, 20 years younger than me that much anymore. It's always old people. We complain about our kids and paying for college and retirement and house and mortgage stuff and laundry and sick parents. And when you get to be, people of our age in our 50s, I don't know, I think you might be in your 70s, but around 50, I guess, somewhere, life changes. And you forget how fun it is to talk to younger people, and their concerns are very different. And so it was really enjoyable to hang out with my young teammates with the Free Press softball team a couple of times last week. And I look forward to doing that maybe a little bit more often.
Yeah, no, that sounds really nice. And you're absolutely right. It is fun to hang out with people a little bit younger, give you a little bit of energy, new perspectives, right?
Yep. Absolutely.
It's important. The generation behind us always knows more. That's how it is. And if you just accept that, you'll be a lot happier, right? Rather than just fretting and worrying that they were going to destroy the world, which they're not. They're probably going to make it better.
We did that.
That's usually how it goes. My favorite thing is you apparently in this softball business of yours were coaching Mike Elrick, our colleague who writes the what does he write? He writes an investigative column.
Is it investigative?
Right? Yeah, a rather lengthy column.
It's fantastic, by the way.
Yeah, it is. He does a great job with it. And I, of course, do a podcast. Maybe I shouldn't say, of course. I don't expect you to know this, but I do a podcast with Mike. It's called The Soul of Detroit. And Mark Fellhauer, who is our producer. And you mentioned to me, you said, hey, when you get over there and you see Mike, you give him a hard time because you were trying to coach him. Right. And I don't know if he wasn't listening or he wasn't taking your advice, something. It wasn't going well. And you said, you let Mike know that I didn't appreciate his coaching. I mean, the way, his response to my coaching. Maybe that was it.
No, it was his pitching. It was his pitching. He wasn't.
Okay.
He was struggling.
So he was struggling. So, I misunderstood that. So this makes it even better. So I told Mike when I saw him, I said, hey, Carlos wasn't happy. He said he was coaching you or something and you were doing a poor job or you weren't listening. He's like, look, well, judging by the way he writes, I would take whatever advice he has and do the opposite. So that's that was his response. And that's not my favorite thing, actually. Real quickly, my favorite thing is that finally, because you mentioned the Minnesota game, the Lions are going to be on the road. Our colleague Jeff Seidel will be at that game. So you and I will be back here. And I think you're going to come over to Ann Arbor and we're going to watch the game together. And I'm going to make some food for you. So finally, after years and years of talking about it, we're going to get to do it. And that's my favorite thing, that it's about to happen. I mean, I know maybe something will come up, but at least it seems real for a change. And that's my favorite thing.
Am I going to get the Matt Charbonneau treatment and be able to get, food all day long and sleep over and be like an adopted son?
You can have that or yeah. I mean, I can bring, I guess I could bring you food too. I've done that for them before under certain circumstances, but yeah, come over. I'll bring we got a blow up mattress.
Oh, nice.
How would that be?
Nice. Okay.
Yeah. I'll tuck you in. I'll give you the quilt that my grandma made for me. And how about that? Would that be good?
Oh, that'd be awesome. Yeah, I'm totally looking forward to it. What are you going to make me?
Okay. Whatever you want. I will probably barbecue, but if there's something else you want, then we can do that too.
I will
It's-
leave it up to the chef. I've heard a lot about your wife's fried chicken that apparently you can.
Yeah, maybe we'll do that. Maybe we'll just do that.
But if that's
Maybe we'll do some
messy,
fried
that's
chicken.
a lot of work with the oil and everything.
Well, would you consider eating fried chicken and some barbecue?
Oh
'Cause they do kind of go together.
Are you kidding?
All right, maybe we'll just do that. We'll make fried chicken. I'll also make some barbecue and some kind of barbecue. I don't know, pork or pulled pork or ribs or smoke some. Well, we won't do barbecue chicken because we're going to fry it. But does that sound
That
good?
sounds fantastic. I'm already looking forward to it.
All right. Yeah, I look forward to that. That's in a couple of weeks, and I'm sure we'll have stories about it. Until then, actually, no, before then, we'll be back next week, right?
Yeah.
And who knows? We're going to have some football to talk about, and then I don't know, whatever else you want to talk about.
Yeah.
Does that work?
It still works. Yes, we can do it.
All right, my man. Who do we need to thank?
Well, you know who we need to thank. You know who we need to thank, who, by the way, wasn't at the game last week. Executive producer and star right fielder Anjanette Delgado. What is she now? She's co-executive producer along with Kirkland Crawford. And you know what? We should have mentioned Andrew Hammond though. Producer. He's at the top.
We use it. He is at the top.
I'm screwing this up. I'm doing the outro as well as Elric pitches. So you gotta
no.
yank me now.
No, you did great. We mentioned everybody we needed to mention, except for Peter Boccia, the executive editor. He obviously makes all this possible. And we want to thank the listeners, right, Carlos, for listening. I mean, that's pretty important.
Our listener is very important to us.
I think they're hugely important. Otherwise, it's just you and me just running our mouths. And I mean, I guess that's what it is anyway.
Yeah, that's the fun part of it.
Yeah, it is the fun part of it. So if you want to keep listening, and we sure hope you do. In fact, we're encouraging you to do. You can find us wherever you find your favorite podcasts, at Spotify, at Apple, and when you get there, subscribe, please. Give us a rating. Give us a shout. Tell us what you think. Whatever it is you think, we'd love to hear from you. Carlos, when are we going to be back? Next week?
Next week, Shawn.
Okay. With more Free Press Sports with Carlos and Shawn. Until then, we will, I don't know. What are we going to do, Carlos? We're going to write about a lot of football.
Yeah. We'll talk to you on Twitter.
Okay. And we'll talk to you on Twitter. All right, folks. Thanks again for joining us. We will talk to you next week.